All right, this week I'm going to build a deck around the bus, but unlike with most decks, I'm not going to dig holes and pour concrete. Instead, I'm going to be using one of these, which is a ground screw. Whether this is a good idea or not, I don't know. We will find out. So let's do it. My first step is to mark out the ground where I want the post to go. I already have a couple of sets of bearers in place, so I just need to set up a string line and make sure I am straight, square and level to those. The screws go pretty easily into the ground. It's just a case of stopping and checking pretty regularly to ensure they are going in straight. Once the screws are 2/3 of the way in, you need a bit of leverage. I'm going into pretty firm ground here, but with a length of 2x6, or better still an iron bar, the screws go in pretty easily. I've only put a handful of these in so far, but already I'm starting to see a few advantages and disadvantages. A definite advantage is, you can see with this one, how if I had to dig a hole there, so you'd probably want it this big for a post. I've got a pipe here, there's a load of gravel here that would then, fall into the hole. It would be really tricky to dig a hole here, whereas screwing that down was super easy. As far as disadvantages go, you can see here there's a bit of a slope. So this screw is all the way into the ground, so it's rock solid. This one is sticking out a bit, and it's still solid actually, and it's got, what's that? That's not, it's not a huge amount, it's probably like this much sticking out. So that is 15 centimeters or 6 inches out of the ground, and that's solid. But I wouldn't want that to be kind of any higher really. So if the ground does have kind of ups and downs in it, you might then have to sort of put a post in and then put the beam on top of that. My original aim was to do this entire deck with ground screws. After measuring up, I realised the land in this middle section dipped down too far. The only ground screw I was able to buy was 690mm or 2 foot, so instead I opted to go for concrete and put 3 posts in here. Well, the ground slopes away here. I think just putting a post here is going to be a better bet than putting a screw in. It'll actually be a good contrast to see which takes more effort. This clay starts about this deep beneath the topsoil. This is pretty hard digging. So it will be a good comparison between this and just driving in the screws as to see which takes the most energy. I'll gauge it by the amount of sweat I get on my t-shirt. I found this enormously heavy cast iron bath at the dump. I'm going to make this into a wood-fired hot tub and recess it into the deck, so I need to get it into position now before fixing any posts in place. So the wood was delivered this morning, which is good. Could have been a little bit closer to the bus, but I was actually out when it arrived, so bit of carrying to do. It's all good though. I'm using this 2x6 to keep all of the posts supported and in line, so I can just set the concrete around the posts. I just need to drive a few stakes into the ground and then screw the 2x6 to the stakes, making sure everything is straight and running exactly down my string line. I'm also staking in some extra support here to make sure that the posts are completely level. Interestingly, the ground screws I put in yesterday took about the same amount of time it took just to dig the holes. All this laying out work is extra time. From this perspective, the ground screws are starting to look like a very good deal. Right, these are all straight and level. I've got about this much room all the way around the post, so there's plenty of room for the concrete, and they're also suspended above the ground by about this much, so the concrete will get under there and they won't just be sitting in water and mud. In this section, I'm just building a little step that will connect that kind of gravel path there up to the deck. So this has to be slightly lower. You know, jobs like these, it's interesting when you're kind of a DIY kind of person like me and not a professional builder, is you learn something on every job. And something I've used for this one is like this. It's just unbelievably useful. It just clips onto a bit of string and it's like having, you know, like a normal level like this, except you can have it as long or as short as you want. I mean, so cheap and just so amazingly useful. Sure, you can have a laser level, but for me, that does the job. I think I'm going to leave it there for this afternoon. Most of the concrete work is done now, so there's a little step just on that side and it comes up to the main bit of the deck, runs across here. There's going to be a bath, which will be a wood-fired bath, kind of semi-recessed into the deck, so there'll be sort of this much sticking out. And then at the end, where you can just see just there's a kind of black post in the ground, I'm going to put another one of those large posts into the ground and then wall off that back area, so it will sort of act as a bit of a windbreak and also give us a little bit of privacy on the deck. But that's it for today, and then I'll hit it again tomorrow. For bearers, I'm using two 2x6s nailed together. Ideally, I'd like the joins to be over the posts for extra support. As a minimum, the join needs to be within 1/3 of the span from the post. In other words, I don't want my joins to be in the middle of two posts, so I need to make a few cuts. So I've nailed the bearers off together now, so they're like operating as effectively one beam. And now I've just got to get them level. They're kind of roughly level, they're just sitting in the stirrups, but just the nature of the ground screw, you can only get them to a certain height, and then you've just got to kind of get them perfectly level. So I'm going to go around with the level and sort that out now. I'm using plastic packers to lift the bearers up just a few millimeters. This will hold it in place before I screw it in. Now everything is level, I'm just going around and screwing the bearer to the post. If this was wood, I'd probably just drill all the way through and then use a bolt, but since I don't fancy my chances of getting through that and finding the other hole, I'm using these coach screws. They're pretty solid. Those are the ones I'm using for the posts, but they do require pre-drilling because they're massive, but should be plenty of support there. None of my drill bits were long enough. This meant the last few turns of the screws took a massive amount of force, too much even for the impact driver, so I had to use a wrench. I could really use some longer drill bits. You know, no matter how many tools I own, I always find I need more. The concrete has had a day to set, so I can now remove all of the supports from the posts. Now the first two bearers are perfectly level, I'm running a string line off them and cutting the posts in the concrete to match. So the deck's in pretty good shape. Most of the posts and the bearers are in, and now I thought would be a good time to talk about these and whether this was worthwhile. These turned out to be loads easier than I thought. There's a few kind of bad things about them, I guess, but I'll talk about the good things first. So the best thing about them, I reckon, is just the ease of it. So these go into the ground, you know, as soon as you've got some leverage on it, they go in super easily. I'd say it took me less effort than even just digging the hole. So if you're going to dig a hole and then after that you've got to pour the concrete on it and then you've got to wait a day and you've also got to kind of line up all your posts accurately, that's quite a lot of work. So in terms of time, this was way quicker. What else is good about it? Another good thing about it is the fact that you could take it out if you didn't want it there. So I think for things like tiny houses that you might be moving around, you want a removable deck, something like that, temporary structures, anything like that, it would be incredible. Another cool thing about them actually is that you don't really disturb the ground around where you're working. So if you're trying to work around, like when I was working over at the front of the bus, there's a whole load of gravel there. So normally if you were digging a hole, all the gravel would fall into it and you get in a mess. Whereas with that, you literally don't disturb the soil even that far away from your hole, which is amazing. So that was the really good thing about it. Bad things about them, just the size of them, they're not that big. So I mean, you can see here, like you can't just have like that in the ground and then all of that sticking out. It's just not strong enough. So in order for it to be kind of stable, you need to probably have, like, say, this much into the ground with just a little bit sticking out. So that means that the ground you're working with has to be pretty level. There was a couple of spots where I just realised, oh, this isn't going to work, and so I had to just go back to concrete and post. But still, it's a really good product, I think. In terms of cash, I think they're pretty reasonable, really. These are, I think in New Zealand they're $30, which I'm guessing US is like $20, something like that. If you compare that to, say, buying a bag of concrete and then buying either a 4x4 or 5x5 or whatever to stick in that concrete, it's pretty similar. I mean, this is going to be a little bit more money, but so if you were doing loads and loads of holes, then maybe it's not that cost effective, but for just a few holes, I don't think that's too bad, really. Yeah, let me know what you think. I think it's pretty good. I think it's a good product. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear, you know, what you think about it and your method of doing it. I realise not everybody chucks post directly into the ground. It's a bit of a kind of no-no in England and in the US, but I think in New Zealand, that's what people do here. They tend to put wood straight into the ground and a bit of concrete. So I'm just kind of going by what people do here and what the local council recommends. But yeah, drop me a note in the comments. Be good to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. See you next week.